Hello, this is Chase Larsen. This is my historical timeline PowerPoint. So the way that I organize this is the first four laws and cases are going to be cases that were significant for ELLs and that were significant in the putting ELLs on the map and making people realize that this is a problem in the United States. And then the next three are going to be policies put in place by presidents. So one of them is by George W. Bush, and the other two are going to be by the Obama administration. And then the final three are going to be policies that are enacted today. So policies that we see today and that were signed recently. So let's begin. Okay, so the first one is going to be the Brown versus Board of Education. So this was a landmark case in United States history. It's a very common case. It was signed in Topeka, Kansas in 1954. It unanimously approved that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. It was one of the cornerstones of the civil rights movement, and it helped pave way for the future laws regarding English language learners. So this is significant for ELL students because they couldn't be segregated in schools anymore. So, they couldn't be segregated based off their skin color or based off, what language they spoke. This made sure that every school couldn't segregate based off that, and every kid deserved an education. So this was kind of the beginning of ELLs getting recognized in the United States. So the next law was the Title VI Bilingual Act that was signed in 1968. So shortly after, about a decade after, or a couple years after the Brown versus Board of Education. And so, again, it was signed in 1968. It provided grants to school districts and other eligible entities through a grant process. It was originally meant for Spanish surname students, but more proposals were merged into the final bill. The final bill called for the inclusion of all children with limited speaking ability and children whose dominant home language is not English. So this was similar to the Brown versus Board of Education, just instead of for all segregation, this was targeted just for ELL students. So just for students that either didn't speak English or their home language wasn't English. Maybe their parents didn't speak English, but they did. And so this kind of called the schools, these kids need to be involved as well. So this was actually in place until 2002. So this had a very big impact on English language learners. And so the next one is going to be the Lau versus Nichols in 1974. And this might be the most important case for ELL students. And so this was when Chinese students were being segregated and, kind of put in their own areas and they were pretty much put in schools and given English books, given books and homework in English, and they were just expected to learn it. So, as it said, so it says here Chinese Americans were given the same materials as everybody expected to learn English. It was kind of the book used the term sink not swim, or sink or swim. So it was either you learned it and you were fine, or you never learned English and, you were just kind of forgotten about. And so this court case determined that ELL students need to be given different facilities and curriculum to help them learn the language. The Department of Education created the Lau remedies to find districts that were ignoring the needs of ELLs, and this required districts to implement bilingual education programs for English language learners. So, because of these Chinese students being just thrown in the schools and expected to learn, they were obviously struggling because that's not fair. So this case made schools implement bilingual education programs. So these students had to, schools had to have programs to help these students learn the language before they could, slowly learn the language instead of just being thrown in the classroom and expected to learn it on their own. And so then the last one for these milestone cases is Castaneda versus Pickard. And so this was a federal court that found that Raymondville School District fell short of meeting the requirements for working with ELL students, but the court did not believe they needed bilingual education. So this one was it was positive, but it was also negative for these ELL students. So they implemented a three-pronged test to see if schools were taking the appropriate action. So the first one was programs must be based on sound educational theory. The second was the school implemented effectively with sufficient resources. And the third was that they evaluated to determine whether they're effective in helping students overcome language barriers. And so these are these are good tests to have, but the problem was the first two tests were very easily passed. So most schools passed the first two tests, even if they didn't have sufficient resources or a sound educational theory. The state still passed them. A certain time, it takes a long time for the third one to pass because the people have to go in there and look at the school, so it took a long time to pass. And so while this was happening, the first two were bypassed quickly, and the third one took a long time to figure out. You still had ELL students who were struggling. And even with all these past court cases, courts still had a reluctance to help ELL students. They were kind of still in the back burner. And so now we'll go into policies put in place by presidents. So the first one was the No Child Left Behind Act, signed in 2002 by George Bush. And this placed a heavy emphasis on high-level testing from third grade through high school. And so every student needed to take the test regardless if they were an ELL student or not. All students were expected to pass the test, so schools were expected to have a 100% pass rate. And then schools were held accountable for test results, and ELL students didn't get much help. This policy was not fair for ELL students, and schools suffered because of it. It wasn't fair because a lot of they made a few changes to it to where, if it was your first year in the U.S., you didn't have to take it, but for the most part, every ELL student had to take the test in English, and it wasn't fair if they didn't know English; they had to take a test in English. So they obviously weren't doing very well on the test and probably not passing it, and so a lot of these schools weren't getting a 100% pass rate, and so they were getting sanctioned and stuff by the United States. So. The idea behind the act is good, but first of all, it's not fair to see that every school should be getting a 100% pass rate, especially when you're not helping these ELL students who, can't speak English. So they were pretty much taking a test in a different language and expected to pass it. So this was a good law. It was in place for 14 years, so it was a good law, but it had its faults to it. And so in 2009, President Obama, the Obama administration released this Counter Act, the Race to the Top, basically to counter the No Child Left Behind Act. So this provided over $4 billion in grants to half of the states who qualified for it. And the states that qualified, they needed to agree to make high-quality assessments that were made for every student as long as college remedy standards. So they had to give them standards that would make these kids ready for college, as well as give them assessments that fit every student. So, whether that be ELL students or students with a learning disability, this test had to be, they had to give assessments so they could tell where these kids were at. It was mainly enacted to help ELL students, but like I said earlier, it helped other students as well. But this was one of the counteracts that the Obama administration put in place because of the No Child Left Behind Act. And the other one was the Elementary and Secondary Act flexibility. So this was signed in 2011 by the Obama legislation as another counter to the No Child Left Behind Act. Every state had to propose an alternative accountability system that addressed similar needs to the ones that Race to the Top. States needed to make assessments in college career readiness that improved the performance of the ELLs. So this was kind of putting it on the schools to address principles, similar to the ones in Race to the Top, so they could further help these students and do well in these tests. Because again, it's not fair to expect a student who's learning the language to take a test in the language and not given languages such as English in this case, and for them to excel in it. And so now we're going to go to laws that are still in act today. So in 2015, President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act, and this was in place of the No Child Left Behind Act. And so this was signed by President Obama in 2015. It maintains the standards and testing requirements of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So states received greater flexibility in establishing school accountability systems. So states pretty much had more they had more flexibility on ELL students, as they could choose the assessment they give to these students. So they could give them tests that, maybe if this student, was an ELL student, they could give them this test and help them through it, and make the test for them so they know so the student can show what they know, because just because they don't know the language doesn't mean they don't know the content. And so this categorized students into 4 groups based on needs. So one of them is ELL. And so they could focus on these just ELL students because they had other categories as well. And this act it's too early to tell the success of it, but because it was just launched very recently. But it'll be interesting to see how this helps these students. And so the roadmap policy was signed in 2017 in the state of California, and it's of course still in act today. And this focuses on ELL students and the quality of teaching they are receiving, among other things. Quality of teaching, the state of the facilities, the kind of research they're getting, stuff like that. The goal is for the state to establish learning methods and teachers that can help ELL students get the most of their education. So it focuses on starting students young, and starting to get them to learn English young, and having them do a lot of group work with people, and having peer tutors and student aides and stuff to help these ELL students learn the language. The goal is to prepare these students for college and for their careers. So if they want to go to college, they have the ability to go to college out of high school. They've been given the resources to do that. And if they don't want to go to college, they have the resources to go start their careers. And so the last one is the Bill H 4032, which was signed in the state of Massachusetts in 2017. The goal for this new bill is to give students resources to help every ELL student succeed in school. So this is similar to the one in California, it's just Massachusetts law or bill. And so the Department of Education will make seals of biliteracy for high school diplomas. They recognize students who are proficient in English and another language. So if you have a student who speaks 2 languages, they can qualify to get the seal of biliteracy if they know English and, let's say, Spanish, for example, which looks good on a resume. And then they created a parent advisory committee at schools with high-level ELL learners just to further help these students learn English. And so, this is my works cited page. So those are the 10 laws that I was able to find that are important for the ELLs. So it's been cool to see how we've done from the Board of Education case in 1954 all the way to in 2017. We have states making laws to make these ELL students feel more accepted in schools. And it's been cool to see these ELL students that were once put on the back burner people are starting to realize that this is a problem we have in the United States. And it's not that these kids don't know, they're not smart. It's just they don't know the language, so they can't show how smart they are. So I think that these cases and bills show how much the United States has learned about ELLs in the past 50, 60 years, and how we're continuing to learn more about them. So that's my PowerPoint.